Hi, this is Katie Anderson, and welcome to my author interview series. I am so thrilled to be speaking with John Dyer today. He's the author of The Façade of Excellence. John and I had a chance to meet in person in October of 2022 at the Association for Manufacturing Excellence, and I am really excited to explore some of the topics in his book today, get to know some of his behind-the-scenes insights, and share some golden nuggets of wisdom over his many years of leadership with you. So welcome, John, and I'm looking forward to talking with you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, could you, before we get started with the questions, could you give a short introduction of who you are and sort of how you came to be writing a book on leadership?
Okay. Well, I've been in the team-based continuous improvement business for almost 38 years now. 10 of that was with General Electric, 10 with Ingersoll Rand, and then I've been out on my own for almost 18 years, heading up my own consulting company. About 8 or 9 years ago, I started writing articles for Industry Week magazine, and they became pretty popular over the years. And one of the articles caught the eye of a publisher who asked me to turn it into a book. And the book came out right as the pandemic started, which is never a good time to launch a new book. But it's been slowly gaining a good base of readers, and it's having more and more of an impact. But I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it.
Yeah, well, great. And as a fellow author who published in the early days of a pandemic, my book of Learning to Lead, Leading to Learn came out in July of 2020. I understand the challenges that come along with that. The great thing about books, as you know, is that they're there in perpetuity. And so it's great that this is a wonderful resource that now that people can start diving into and continue to learn from your wisdom. So my first question was actually, it's one I ask all authors, and you probably have a slightly different answer given that you had this series of articles that you were already writing for Industry Week, and we'll link to some of those on the show notes on my website. But what was the problem you were trying to solve, or what inspired you to really write this book?
Okay. It really goes all the way back to the early days of my career. And I write about this in the book. When I joined General Electric, I was interested in robotics, and that I thought my whole career was going to be based on, dealing with robotic manufacturing systems. And, but again, my career took a completely different turn when I started digging into how systems work and how, the flaws of a poorly designed system and how that can create havoc in a manufacturing environment, and how, we tend to point fingers at people, the operators. What did they do wrong? Not realizing that if you give someone a poorly designed process with bad tools and bad machinery, they can't do anything, right? It's not their fault. One of my favorite Dr. Deming quotes is that a bad system will beat a good person every time. And I have lived that my whole career. Mm. So I started getting interested in this idea of, team-based improvement. It was in its very infant stages of, not many people had heard of the Toyota production system in those days. But one of the GE executives who became a mentor of mine went to Japan. And this was in, when people were just starting to wake up to the fact that Toyota and Nissan and, all these great Japanese companies were coming on the scene. And he went to Japan on a fact-finding trip. And he relayed a story to me where he said that he spent the entire day with one of the CEOs of one of the major Japanese companies. And this CEO was extremely open with him, answered every one of his questions, spent all day with him, took him to all different corners of the factory, introduced him to all of his employees. And at the end of the day, he asked the CEO, how much money do you make? And even in Japan, that's a very rude question. And the CEO looked at him and said, why are you asking me such a rude question? And he said, well, I was just trying to find something you wouldn't answer. Why have you been so open with me? And this is what he said. And this is actually, like I said, the big turning point in my career and what led me to study how leaders behave. He said, here in Japan, we've been doing this team-based continuous improvement for several decades. You at General Electric are just getting started. And I remember this was the early 1990s. And he said, and you have 100 years of bad management practice to overcome. So by the time you get to where we are today, we're going to be so much further down this road that you're not really a threat to us. So what else would you like to know?
Yeah.
And being, fresh out of college, early in my career, I heard this story and I was like, okay, the gauntlet has been dropped. What do we need to do to catch up and change the way that we lead and manufacture and work in teams? And I thought at that time, literally, that this is going to take us a few years and we'll be there, well, that was 35 years ago. And we have certain pockets in the US where companies have made the transition and culture and leadership and, people-centric type leadership styles, but not nearly the widespread adoption that I was thinking would happen. So my whole career, I've been trying to understand, why is this not happening faster? Everybody understands that this is great. The companies that have adopted empowered teams of employees that can drive problem solving right there at the point of manufacturing have done extremely well over the years. Those that have adopted all the lean principles, all the Six Sigma principles, have done extremely well. So it's like, if there's so much evidence out there that this works, why isn't every company, and not only manufacturing, but outside of manufacturing, wasn't every organization taking this approach? And that's what led to writing the book.
Great. I'm 100% with you there. And, as you know, I lived in Japan and I go back regularly. And at the time of this recording, I'm about to head off to my first trip to Japan in 3 years since the pandemic. And it's amazing how open companies are there and their leaders as well. And it's for that same point too. It's because it's very hard to copy the people side. It's easy to copy the artifacts and the tools. And so that's a lot of what we got wrong in the lean world. Obviously, the tools and the processes and the visual, systems are important, but it's how do we engage with each other as people. So I'm really excited to dive into that with you a little bit more here too. One of the frameworks, it was like the major framework in your book, is around the different leadership styles going, the 4 different leadership styles going from the more of a dictator style all the way through empowerment. And my first is, could you describe briefly what the 4 styles are? And then I have some follow-up questions for you about that.
Okay, yeah. Again, trying to put this in terminology that a US leader would be able to understand and grasp. The first style is what I call crisis leader. And this is the one that's closest to that dictator side, which we would all agree we want to get away from. But there is a time and a place for a crisis leader. If an organization is suffering, if they've got safety issues, if they got customer issues, if they're in the red from a financial standpoint, they need somebody that's going to be willing to step forward, take the lead, take the responsibility, make the tough decisions, and help get the organization out of crisis mode. And I think most US-based leaders are comfortable doing that. That's what they've been rewarded for decades. So I don't want to discount that. When I talk to a group of leaders, I don't want to discount the fact that, yes, there is a time and a place for that kind of leadership style. However, the longer you stay in crisis mode, the more that people get burned out, the more that their brains shut down, the more that they become, robotic zombies. And you're not taking advantage of the tremendous brain power of all of the people in the organization. So a good people-centric leader will know that they need to get out of style 1 as fast as possible and move to style 2, which is the idea gathering leader. And this is just simply starting to ask all people within the organization for their ideas for improvement. And what's important about that is it starts getting them thinking about the future. It also starts engaging their brains to start thinking in a different manner than what they may be used to, and start looking for opportunities for improvement. Then style 3 is the team gathering leader, where, and again, these need to be more formal teams with trained facilitators to help solve difficult problems or lead Kaizen type events. Then style 4 is what I call the empowerment leader, where by this point, you've done a lot of training, you've gotten the employees engaged, you've solved some problems, you're starting to gain momentum. You're also starting to change the culture and build the trust. And now you're ready to start asking the employees to address problems real time as they happen. They have the tools, but you also have to give them the backing, because they're not going to be perfect every time. And if they make a mistake, you have to, learn from that and move forward. Now, the reason I lay it out kind of in those 4 styles is that, again, I've seen companies that have struggled with this and have tried to make the jump all the way from style 1 to style 4 with horrific results. The employees aren't ready to be empowered. They haven't been trained. The culture hasn't changed. There is no trust. So the moment something goes wrong, then it's like they feel that the finger of blame is going to be pointed at them, and they just shut down. And then the leaders throw their hands up and say, well, we tried and it didn't work. So I think it's really important for the growth of the organization to go through each of the 4 steps, 4 different styles.
That was one of the things that I found really powerful in your book, is not only describing the 4 different styles, but really taking us on a journey about how leaders can make that progress up up those different stages, and explicitly calling out that you can't go from style 1 to style 4 immediately. There's a gap you have to close in other people's capabilities and in the organization's capabilities too. So that was a really powerful aspect of your book, and really helpful for people to see that growth pattern of both what to do and what not to do. Right. I completely agree that, we've, especially in the West, have been rewarded for being crisis leaders, for being expert people with the answer. I always talk about that we need to break the telling habit, and that there's a time and place for that, but we are really stuck often in seeing everything as this 5-alarm fire crisis all the time. And that's not, you can't continue to live in crisis, in perpetuity. Otherwise, we're never going to make progress. What recommendations do you have for leaders? Say, we're kind of the pandemic's no longer an acute crisis. We're sort of living with the ongoing reality. We're moving into the new world. How can leaders help themselves and thus their organizations move from this sense of needing to be in crisis mode and start moving more into this empowerment, continuous improvement, thriving, people-centered organization?
Well, and I think that this really helps to kind of explain what's going on with all the quiet quitting and the great resignation and those kinds of terms that have popped up over the last couple of years. Think about an organization that had, before COVID, made it to style 3 or 4. And the employees were engaged, they were doing teams, they were starting to get empowered, the trust was starting to build. And and the employees were, I mean, I tell you, I've had the opportunity to work in those environments, and they're great. I mean, everybody is coming to work. They're energized. They're like, what can we do to help? I mean, they would knock walls down for you. I mean, it's just like once you engage people and get them bought in, and they feel like they have a say in things, it's incredible what you can accomplish. Well, now all of a sudden COVID hits, and every organization in the entire world went all the way back to style one, crisis mode. And the problem is that we've now been in crisis mode for 2.5 years. And people are starting to worry that maybe those days of teamwork, empowerment, collaboration, excitement, ownership, buy-in, being listened to are behind them. They are not coming back, at least in the organization they're currently a part of. So it's like, okay, well, if my organization is not going to move out of crisis mode, then maybe I can find some other organization that has moved on, that has progressed back to the style 2 or 3. Now, why aren't more organizations getting out of crisis mode? Well, one, they again, we've had, several decades of managers and leaders getting rewarded for being good crisis leaders. And for the last couple of years, it's like, wow, I feel kind of good about this again. Yeah, look at me. We made it through COVID. All right, and they may be getting rewarded again for that. And all of a sudden, it's like bad habits have come back and they're hard to break again. And it's like almost kind of like we're starting over. So in a way, we need to go back to style 2 and start engaging employees again by asking for their ideas, and then slowly work back into doing teams again, and so forth and so on. But it's funny because I've talked to some leaders that are in that crisis mode, and they're like, John, we need to figure out how to break the cycle of COVID crisis. And I'm like, okay, let's have a meeting and talk about it, and maybe we can do a workshop. And they're like, no, we're still too deep in the crisis. We don't have time for workshops and discussions. And it's like, there you go. That's the problem. You're not ready yet to break the cycle. And if they're not careful, they're going to lose their best employees because they're getting burned out.
Yeah. Well put and articulated. And I think that's probably going to resonate with many people, and especially for those who were sort of the leaders in transformation efforts and had made progress, starting to see the gap now, maybe because we know it was possible and was there, but we're back stuck. And as you know, we never really break old habits. We just replace them with stronger ones. So it's like almost we need to go back to the gym and start with the basics and the light weights and build our way back up to asking more questions, giving more space, not jumping in with all the answers and telling people what to do.
And think about this, the organizations that do that soonest and the best will attract the best people, because there's a lot of people out there that really want to work in that environment. And if they're not happy in their current organization because they're still in crisis mode, they're going to be searching. So those are going to be the winners, the organizations that can break out of the COVID crisis mode.
So what's your recommendation or your suggestion for this leader, or any leader who recognizes they need to move out of crisis, but don't feel like they can because the crisis is in the midst? What's one thing that you recommend that they do?
The first thing is to carve out time in your day on your calendar to start behaving the way you were behaving before COVID, right? Whether it's an hour a day or 30 minutes a day, start talking to people about the vision. I talk in the book about how important it is to have a well-articulated vision that excites and motivates your employees. And you really need to do that before asking for their ideas for improvement, because if they don't know where the organization is headed, how can they give you any good input on what improvements need to happen? So, carve out 30 minutes to an hour every day, pull your trusted employees together in your office, you know, the ones that you lean on, and start developing a new vision, a new post-COVID vision that will really motivate and excite people, and then start communicating with your employees again, you know, and asking for their thoughts and inputs, and how can we get better? How can we start on this journey again? And you may have to do some additional training to, you know, because again, if you don't use the tools or methodologies for several years, you start losing it. So in a lot of ways, it's going to feel like starting over again.
Yeah, you've got to get back in the gym, get back, like go back and strengthen those habits and yeah, make progress, move forward. And it's the same thing. I mean, I using the gym analogy, but it's the same things, like just get to the gym or do one thing. And sometimes it can feel so daunting, right? That we know where we need to go and the gap seems so big, but just like making, as you said, doing one thing or 1 hour every week, that's going to start to build that momentum.
Right.
So I want to move into like the structure of writing your books. You have so many great business insights, and you wrote this book in 2 different styles, which I really valued, because different people have different, you know, things resonate differently with them. You wrote a story, or actually several stories, that go through the arc to illustrate your points, and then you really dissect that from a business perspective in more of, you might say, a traditional business leadership approach. Talk to me about, you know, first, what was the vision behind that, and then how was it for you to write this sort of, a fiction story all coupled with a nonfiction business side?
Well, you know, one of my favorite books is The Goal, and the author used the same kind of a storytelling style. And so when I started writing my articles for Industry Week, I started incorporating a small story in each article. And if people read the articles back to back to back, you start to see the development of the characters. The ones, her name's Mary. She starts off as a production leader in one article, and 10 articles later, she's a plant manager and worked her way up. So I enjoy that style of writing. And so when I sat down to write the book, I thought, you know, again, how do you convey the sense of culture, the sense of emotion that employees go through when they are asked to participate in these things? You know, the reluctance at first, the fear at first, and then eventually becoming a champion, and then maybe even getting to the point where they're a champion and then having the rug pulled out from underneath them. How do you convey that emotion that's behind the damage that can be done if this isn't done the right way? So I decided to develop 2 characters. One's name is Jim Brown. He's an executive for a company, and he's new to the company, but he wants to do this the right way. He doesn't know exactly how to do it, but he figures that he wants to get the employees engaged and do the teams. But he inherits a staff that doesn't want to change. So right off the bat, they throw up all kinds of blocking. Then there's another executive, Frank Smith. He's the villain of the book. He's also an executive VP for the same company. And he also has been challenged to achieve excellence. And he decides to do it all the wrong way. So he uses fear. He manipulates data. He uses politics to get his adversaries out of the way, and like I said, there's a twist near the end of the book. About halfway through the book, I introduced my favorite character. Her name's Mary, and she becomes a reluctant champion. She's a production worker, and like I said, and then all of a sudden the rug gets pulled out. And my favorite passage in the book is when she's sitting at her workstation after she's found out that all of her mentors have been fired, that all the team's meetings have been abolished, all the training has stopped. And she just really wallows in depression about how did this happen? And she finally concludes that she would have been better off not having participated in any of this and seen how great it was than to participate and have the rug pulled out. And the reason why I wanted to make sure I included that in the book is because I've had so many frontline employees tell me over the years that those kinds of things have happened to them, that they got engaged, they were on the teams, they were reluctant at first, but eventually became champions to the Lean and Six Sigma efforts. And then a new manager comes on board, a new executive, and all of a sudden it just comes to a grinding halt. And they go right back into the old dictator style of management, and they feel almost violated and get really really depressed about their career, about their jobs. So I wanted to make sure I captured that. Now, the stories are fictional. The characters are fictional anyway. But I will tell you, everything that is in the story part has happened sometime in my career. Some people will think, wow, there's no way that could have happened. But it did. I mean, so even though the characters are fictional, all of the events in the story part are real, based on my GE days and Ingersoll Rand days. So
that, I mean, they say, right, that that sometimes, reality is even more unbelievable than fiction, the things you could conceive of. So thank you for that. And I do believe that stories really help ground people in the emotional side, take it from theory to actual practice, which is, the difference between implementing lean or continuous improvement and like living it, and really where organizations need to get to. And I think this story that you explained too is like, or shared of the rug getting pulled out of this employee harkens back to an early part of our conversation of, the pandemic coming in, and that was the right style of leadership, because leaders do need to flex based on the moment at hand. And sometimes crisis leadership is really important when you have the crisis, but how that leadership then, when we're no longer in a crisis, then turns to being the dictator type of leadership. It's so the very same things that people might be wanting and needing in one instance is the very same thing that's going to push them away and make them feel disengaged. So the leader's role is to really know how to match their style with where the company needs to be and where it needs to go.
Right. Now, and I'm hoping that this will give language to that, like even talking with some human resource leaders, the same exact thing could happen if, say, an organization has migrated to style 3 or 4, and then all of a sudden, out of no fault of their own, the human resources put a candidate forward that looks great on paper. The resume looks great. They have great background and experience, but they're a style 1 leader.
Yeah.
Now, all of a sudden, the organization is going to crumble. But I've also seen the opposite happen, where a plant had a style 1 leader for several years, and they were like, okay, we want to jumpstart our lean efforts, and they hire someone who only is comfortable in style 4, and they come on board and they get frustrated, and they're saying, why aren't people stepping up and becoming empowered and willing to do the teams, not realizing they're not ready for it. And they haven't been trained. There is no trust. The culture hasn't changed. And what tends to happen then is they get frustrated and eventually leave. So I'm hoping that the book gives some context to how important it is to identify where the organization is on that progression, what leadership style is needed at that particular time in their journey, and how do you identify the right leaders for that particular moment in the history of the organization.
Well said. And I that to me was one of the most powerful takeaways from the entire book, not only describing the different leadership styles, but how to make that match and the impact that it has. So 2 final questions for you. One is, what has been the biggest shift you have made for yourself personally in your own leadership style that you believe has the greatest impact for you over your career?
Well, when I started at General Electric, I actually was part of their manufacturing management program for 2 years, and we learned the GE, way to manage. And as I worked my way up the ranks, we were required to go through management training in Crotonville, New York, in the corporate training facility. And I would have to say that I learned how to be a very good Frank Smith, right? The villain in the book. I learned how to be, to do a lot of the things that Frank Smith does in the book. And but over the years, I just became more and more, the realization that you just don't go very far. You don't get the people engaged. You just don't get the teamwork in place. It's like pushing a rope all the time, and it's like being in crisis all the time. And you just, at a certain point in my career, I just realized that wasn't the way to get things done. And when I left GE and went to Ingersoll Rand, I got the opportunity to play the role of the Jim Brown at a plant in Ingersoll Rand. And we basically went through this entire journey over 3 years in that plant. And it was amazing. I mean, just getting the people engaged, getting them trained, getting them on the teams. I list in the book, my favorite day in manufacturing was in this particular plant at Ingersoll Rand. And we had made it all the way to stall 4. Employees were empowered. They were on teams. We had really great leaders all throughout the factory. And we had these big boards throughout that showed real time how we were doing in meeting our production goals for the day. We had a safety, throughput, quality, linearity score for lean. Anyway, I got a call in my office, and they were like, "John, you need to come out on the plant floor." This was about 10 minutes before the end of the shift. And I go out there and I look up at the board, and it's 100% all the way down the board, where we had a day, we'd never had done this before, where we hit 100% on all of our key metrics. And when the horn went off, indicating the end of the shift, the entire plant erupted in applause and cheers. And the employees were out in the aisles cheering and throwing confetti and, all this stuff. And it was just like, wow, this is so cool that the employees were so engaged, so much ownership, so much a sense of pride that they realized what a huge accomplishment that was. And we actually ended up hitting 100% on all of our key metrics routinely after that. So it does work. Like I said, we talked about at the beginning, there's so much evidence that this stuff really works. Why isn't everybody doing this?
Yeah, totally. Well, that leads to my last question, which is, what is one question that I haven't asked or you're not often asked about the book? So what is the question, and then what is your answer?
That's a deep question. Well, I was about to say I get asked a lot whether I'm going to write another one. My son wants me to write a follow-up book because he wants to find out what happens to Frank Smith and Jim Brown. But I guess the biggest question would be, what do you hope happens with this? I wrote the book not to make money, not to sell copies. I'm hoping to change the narrative on what it takes to really make Lean and Six Sigma successful. We all know the tools, we all know the methodologies. I was a big Dr. Deming fan. I got to study with him early in my career. I got to go to several of his classes. And it's basically, what do we need to do to catch up with those organizations, especially those in Japan that have been doing this for decades? And how do we break out of this crisis cycle that we've been in for really since the early 1900s?
Great question and fabulous answer too. Thank you, John. It's been a pleasure to talk with you about your book, The Façade of Excellence, and I highly recommend people pick it up. I learned something from reading it, particularly around these nuances around the different styles of leadership and how to make them, just how to speak to it. So I think you're already on your way to your goal of helping change leaders and HR leaders and operational leaders have some framework about how to make this leap from crisis to thriving. And for those of you who are listening in the first week of the release of this interview, John and I are giving away a signed copy of our book. So John's excellent book, The Façade of Excellence, and then my book, which actually gets back to the origins of Toyota and in Japan. So sort of the foundations of where we want to go, of collected 40 years of Toyota wisdom from Mr. Asao Yoshino from his experience at Toyota. So these are great compliments. So be sure to register for a chance to win a signed copy of both of the books. And thank you again, John Dyer, for being here. How can people reach you if they want to connect with you directly?
Well, they could follow me on LinkedIn and connect with me there, or on Twitter. Those are the two social media platforms that I use the most. On Twitter, it's at JDYERPI, PI for Process Innovation. That's the name of my consulting company. So yeah, if you want to connect with me on either of those sites, I'd be happy to connect with you.
Great. And then be sure to check out John's articles in Industry Week as well. They're great, and they're the foundation for the book as well. So we'll definitely put some links to those articles there as well. Thank you, John, for joining us today. And of course, everyone who's listened or read this interview, please share your key takeaways and spread the word about the giveaway and this interview as well. And go pick up a copy of your book, The Façade of Excellence. All right, take care, everyone.